In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the correct accent on a Greek word. In a subsequent video, I'll show you how that accent can change when words occur together in a phrase or a sentence. Words, as their form changes, sometimes take different accents. That can look complicated, but in fact, there are a handful of very simple rules that determine where to place the accent on an individual word. First of all, note that on a single word, there are only two possible accents. The acute accent can fall on either a short syllable or a long syllable. The circumflex accent can only fall on a long syllable. And the key to determining where to place the accent is always going to be related to the length of syllables. By long syllable, we mean a syllable with a long vowel, so an eta or an omega, or a long alpha, iota, or upsilon, or a diphthong. By short syllable, we mean a syllable with a short vowel, epsilon or iota, or a short alpha, epsilon or omicron, or a short alpha, iota, or upsilon. Accents can only fall on the last three syllables of a word. And so let's just look at the patterns of possible locations of accents. Only three syllables are possible. And in fact, the circumflex can only occur on the last two syllables. So our pattern for when we can place an accent on the final leftmost possibility, the antepenultimate syllable, the syllable before the next to last syllable, is limited to using the acute accent, and we can only do that when the final syllable, the ultimate syllable, is short. So a short final syllable, it's possible to have an acute on the antepenultimate syllable. When can we have the accent on the next to last syllable? Let's look first at the case of the circumflex. We mentioned that the circumflex is always going to occur over a long syllable, and it can only occur on the next to last syllable over a long when the final syllable is short. So we can place an acute accent over the penultimate syllable when we have the pattern long and final short syllable. The acute accent will take care of the other two cases. That is to say, if we have a final syllable that is long and we want to accent the penultimate syllable, we can use the acute. Or alternatively, if we have a final syllable that is short, but the penultimate syllable is also short, in those cases we can use an acute accent. So these two patterns together give us the sort of complement of this possibility for putting the circumflex on the penultimate syllable. And when can we have an accent on the final syllable? Well, we mentioned that the acute accent can occur on long or short syllables, so whatever the length of the syllable, it's possible to have an acute on the final syllable, whereas with the circumflex, we can only use it when the syllable is long, so you'll only see a circumflex on the ultima when that final syllable is long. How do we decide which of these patterns to apply? This is really the exhaustive list of possible accent patterns. To decide which one to use, you will follow one of two systems. For conjugated verb forms, the very simple rule is that the accent is recessive. That means it tries to move as far away from the end as possible. Whenever possible, it wants to place the accent on this antepenultimate syllable. And so let's just take a couple of examples of a nice long verb, like the verb to teach, pai, do. Let's take it in the present tense, first person, I teach, pai do. The final syllable with that big omega is long, so we can't use this pattern. We can only go back as far as the next to last syllable, and since we have a long final syllable, we have to use the acute accent, pai do, I teach. If we wanted to look at the first person plural, we teach, pai do, men, we teach, we have a short epsilon. So we can go as far back as possible, 1, 2, 3 syllables all the way back, and use the acute paido omen, we teach. And let's take one more example with this verb. Let's use the imperative form, a command in the singular, teach, paido e. Again, a short epsilon for the final syllable, so we can move to the antepenult 1, 2, 3 back and place the acute accent on that first of these 3 syllables. In every instance, it's nothing more than the length of that final syllable that's determining how far we can move back in a recessive system. So conjugated verbs are recessive. They'll try to move as far away from the end as possible. The contrasting system is called persistent accent, and it applies to nouns and to adjectives. And what that means is simply that whenever possible, the accent tries to stay in the same position. It tries to fall on the same syllable persistently. This means, very importantly, that you must learn the accent along with the vocabulary item. It's an inherent part of the vocabulary item. It's not something you can form by rule. Once you know where the accent wants to stay, then you can apply these simple patterns to determine where are we going to be forced to put it. Can we keep it where it wants to go, or do we have to move it or change it? Let's look at a couple of examples. Let's just start with a couple of second declension noun, the noun for person, anthropos. Anthropos. And we have to learn the accent by rote, and we learn that anthropos wants to place the accent on this root syllable. It's like a recessive system. In this case, it's almost equivalent to a recessive system because it wants to persist on this antepenultimate syllable. If we had the same noun, meaning person, in the genitive case, of a person, belonging to a person, anthropou, we've now got an ending that is long as opposed to the nominative ending that was a short omicron. This is a diphthong, so it's long, so we can't go all the way back. We're going to have to put the accent on the penultimate syllable, but we have a long in the final position, so we have to use the acute, anthropou. And if we could maybe note there's one exceptional rule. There's one circumstance where the diphthong oi or I, when they are used as an ending, count exceptionally as short. In the middle of a word or elsewhere, they'd be a normal long diphthong, but as endings, they count as short. So this counts as a short vowel, just like anthropos. So in the plural, people could be accented again on the antepenultimate syllable. Let's look at a similar second declension noun, but take a shorter noun. We'll use a neuter this time. Word for gift, doron. Just one moment here. Okay. So, doron, only 2 syllables, and its accent wants to persist on that root syllable. So, with a short final vowel and this long vowel in the stem and the penultimate syllable, we're going to be using the circumflex accent. Let me just highlight that with a different color here. Now, if we were to change this noun into the genitive case of a gift, we'll see, again, we have a long syllable instead of a short. That means we can't apply a circumflex, and instead we're going to have to keep the accent on the same syllable, but change it from the circumflex to the acute. So doru, of a gift, in the genitive case. We could compare that with, let's say, another neuter noun, word for child, paidion, and its persistent accent wants to fall on this penultimate syllable, paidion. And you can tell, if you think about it, that iota has to be short. We can't tell it from the spelling of the word per se, but we can tell it from the accent, because if it were a long iota, we'd be using the circumflex. So if we were to put this noun into the genitive case by di u with a long final syllable, it would not affect the accent. It could persist exactly where it is, and with that long final syllable, we'll naturally have to use the acute accent, by du. That's really the basics of applying recessive accents to verbs and persistent accents to nouns and to adjectives. And if you keep these small number of patterns in mind, you will not have trouble figuring out which is the correct accent to use. There are just a couple of either exceptions or special cases to mention. What do you do if you have a noun, let's say, like theos, a god or a goddess, depending on whether it's masculine or feminine, and its persistent accent falls on the final syllable? We put that into the genitive case of a god or goddess. We could use either, by rule, we could use either an acute on a long syllable, or we could use an acute or a circumflex on a long syllable. And in this case, it's simply the general pattern that in the genitive and in the dative, these nouns will take a circumflex. In the nominative and in the accusative, they'll take an acute. It's just part of the inflectional pattern. It's not distinguished by these rules. Either are applicable. You have to learn with the declension pattern that genitive, dative take the circumflex, nominative, accusative take the acute. So this is one to just sort of be aware of. It's kind of a just part of the declension as opposed to just the standard pattern rules you can apply without knowing any more than that. A final example of something that you just have to learn as an exception would be first declension nouns. I'll take this example, gnome, meaning opinion, thought, judgment, and its persistent accent wants to stay on the root, next to last, penultimate syllable, and as that word changes its endings, we'll just follow the standard rules, and we'll see that that doesn't provide any additional complications. If we made a genitive out of that, we've got a long eta in that final syllable, so we know that we're going to have to be using the acute accent on gnomes. But the one exception is first declension nouns, when they are in the genitive plural case, move their accent to the final syllable and put a circumflex on it. Historically, it's a contraction of what used to be more than one syllable, but in classical Greek, this is simply an exception. You just have to learn that one exception. These handful of patterns will otherwise get you through everything you need to know to place the correct accent on an individual word. And then in the follow-up video, we'll look at what happens when you take these correctly accented words, use them together in phrases and sentences. Okay.